Good evening and salutations to all my good viewers and friends. This is Curious Formula and welcome to Curious Formula Live. I'm your moderator and your host, Curious Formula. Thank you for rocking with me. Thank you for being here tonight as we talk about some of the things that are happening in our world, politically and otherwise. As you can tell, we are still having some technical difficulties, but you know I cannot not go live because you all are good and patient with me and you recognize the need to have this information. So I thank you for rocking with me and for listening to the information, even if we have technical difficulties. So two topics that we're going to talk about tonight are why Kamala Harris is winning this race, and we're going to talk about Chicago being a poster child for what is wrong with the public education system in America and why it is failing our citizens and most importantly, our students. But before we get into those topics, please make sure you do what we always need you to do here, and that is subscribe, like, comment. Here, go to my TikTok channel, Curious_Formula. Subscribe, like, and comment there as well. We're building this as we fly. The information is important. We want to get right to it, and you are an important part of that. So I want to thank you guys for being with me and being square and staying curious. So let's get into it. Why is Kamala Harris winning this race? The answer is very simple. Well, it's not simple, but there's some really specific reasons as to why she's winning, and there's a very specific bunch of reasons, plethora of reasons, while Donald Trump is losing. And we're going to talk about each and every one of those going forward. So the first thing we have to admit and we have to understand is Donald Trump is actually winning this race. And as somebody who's winning this race, Kamala Harris winning this race, we need to understand the reasons why. As I told you all, if you watch my content here or on YouTube or on TikTok or any other platforms, I constantly tell you, stop watching polls. Stop watching polls. Stop watching polls. Stop watching national polls. Stop watching state polls. Stop watching battleground state polls. They mean nothing. Absolutely nothing with 2 weeks left. What you need to be looking at is the ground. What is the ground game of both campaigns telling us? What are the appearances, the statements, the platforms that candidates are going on telling us about the race? Because polling, particularly in this season and in this year, have been polluted by a lot of alt-left and alt-right polling that has really rendered polling useless for the purposes of prognosticating correctly and with any degree of certainty what the election's results are going to be on November 5th. But the ground game, the organization, the movements, the comments, the rallies, where they're traveling to, who they're traveling to with, tells us a lot more with 2 weeks left. And if you know my content the way I've been saying it, and I've been saying it for 6 weeks now, I am very confident, extremely confident, that not only does Kamala Harris win this race on November 5th, she wins it convincingly. Not by a landslide, but convincingly, and as clear cut as you can get in this modern day era of politics as we know it. So let's talk about some of the reasons why. I'm broadcasting live from New York City. So if you hear some strange sounds from the streets, these are the sounds of vehicles running by. But let's take a listen about some of the things we need to factor into our discourse tonight about who's winning this race. Take a listen.
This information about college grads. Let's start with white college grads.
Let's start with white college grads, because white college grads have been this group that have been moving further and further to the left. All right, this is the Democratic margin among white college grads. Look, Hillary Clinton won them by 5 points. Then Joe Biden won them by 9. Look at this margin that Kamala Harris is pulling up in the polls right now among white college grads. It's an 18-point margin, double the margin that Joe Biden had just 4 years ago. I went back through the record books. This would be the largest win for a Democratic presidential candidate among white college grads in recorded history. That is all the way back since the early 1950s. You could probably go back even further. But the bottom line is that Kamala Harris, amongst this group, is doing ridiculously, ridiculously well, and is one of the main reasons that she has been able to counter Donald Trump's rising support among voters without a college degree. It's because she's doing very well among white voters with a college degree.
All right. So this pundit makes the point that leads us to the reasons why Harris is winning this race. Harris has increased the margin of support with college graduates bigger than Hillary Clinton, bigger than Joe Biden. Clinton was at 5 points plus, as you can see here. Biden was at +9. She is at +18. Now, this is a dated show. It's 2 weeks ago, but recognize that that number has stayed pretty much the same. The Harris margin, if it holds, will be the Democrats' highest ever. And while she is increasing with white college grads, she is also cutting into, and this pundit made the mistake of saying it incorrectly, she's also cutting into Donald Trump's lead with non-college educated white citizens. That should tell us something that the polls don't tell us, is that unconventional people and polls and people that polls are not picking up, at least not at the weight that they should be picked up in polling, are supporting Kamala Harris in ways they heretofore had not done. And this is an example of what I'm talking about. Polling is missing this demographic. Polling is missing the new registrants in blue and purple and red districts. 3-1 for Democrats, 5-1 in some counties and districts across America. They're not picking them up because they were not registered voters as part of the model that these poll compilers have ever looked at in the past. But let's just go through the notions specifically of why Harris's ground is winning the race against Donald Trump. First of all, Kamala Harris has more ground game than Donald Trump has. She has hundreds, I repeat, hundreds of offices in early states. Let's just go through the list real quickly. She has more ground game than Donald Trump. Early voting numbers in blue areas are setting records. She has more appeal to groups that we cannot account for in polling, and Democrats have been outperforming the polls since 2020. For Donald Trump, his canvassing is using campaign sidekicks, which crashes without fast internet in rural areas. Elon Musk's PAC is doing most of Trump's ground game operation, unsuccessfully, I might add. He still has not finalized his ground game with just 2 weeks left, and he's reliant on groups turning out for him at rates they never have before. So let's start with Harris, and let's talk about why she has more ground game than Donald Trump. Kamala Harris has hundreds of offices in battleground states, thousands of canvassers that for the last 3 months, by my own estimate and talking with campaign people on the ground, she has been knocking on doors in those particular areas, identifying her votes. Shout out to David Plouffe, chief campaign manager, the reason why Barack Obama was the winner in 2008, because he fished and farmed votes, not only in the nomination fight for the Democratic nomination, he fished and farmed votes in the general election that got Obama victories in places like North Carolina, in places like Indiana, in places that had not voted Democrat in 30 and 40 years because of targeting and harvesting. He is now part and parcel, a main cog, a main wheel, a main piece of machinery within the get out the vote effort of Kamala Harris. And they couldn't have picked a better person for the bang for the buck. So her ground game has been ferocious for the last 3 months. They have been identifying voters. They have been meeting voters where they are. They have hired rural campaign folks to go after rural votes in red counties, not to win those counties, but to do something we call in politics lose by less than Joe Biden did in 2020. She has really situated Republicans for Harris as a major part of her campaign outreach effort. It is well funded, it is well targeted, and it is bearing fruit. Now, it would be interesting to see if you look at the ground game, it just gives her more avenues to meet the mountain that she must meet. And you all know, if you follow my content, what that mountain is. The mountain for Kamala Harris is she must replicate 2020 turnout in 2024. And she has more avenues to get there, and she's exploring it and working it to get to that number. She should be furious if it is tight, because it shouldn't be tight. She's making outreach to independents, which she leads in, but she's trying to expand her vote total and her vote spread with independents. She's reaching out to Republicans, and she wants to spread her vote total there. She's reaching out to Roe voters, Roe versus Wade voters, and making sure that they get to the polls. Her ground game is simply better than Donald Trump. And when it comes to winning an election that is tight, the ground game makes the difference. Take it from this politician who's been in office and won close elections and blowout elections. Your ground game will either let you sink or let you swim. The second reason is early voting numbers in blue areas are setting records. Yes, Kamala Harris is winning here despite record GOP turnout. Now, we all know that Republicans have get the icks from early voting and absentee voting. In fact, it's part of their rhetoric that kind of voting is illegal, is fraught with fraud. That is how Joe Biden and Kamala Harris stole the election in 2020. And early vote numbers is how Democrats actually made up the difference on the machines in 2020 and beat Donald Trump narrowly in a number of battleground states, particularly the blue wall states of the Northeast, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. But even with the Republicans, in some instances, pushing for more Republicans to vote early and to use absentee ballots, there has been an increase in it, but it hasn't made a difference. The early voting numbers in blue areas are setting records. Just look at the coverage from Georgia. Look at the coverage from North Carolina. Look at the coverage from Michigan. And Wisconsin starts this week, so we'll have an idea about what the ground is there as well. The lion's share of early voting is going to Kamala Harris, and that's why she's winning this race. The third thing, Kamala Harris has more appeal to groups that we cannot account for. I told you all the reason why I don't like polls, the reason why I don't like polling to rely on in terms of who's going to win in a race, is because polling in and of itself is a snapshot in time. And over a couple of days and weeks, it gives you a trend, but that trend is not determinative, and it certainly does not mean it can predict with any great sense of accuracy who's going to win the race. One of the reasons why polling cannot do that is because they use models from previous elections, which don't account for new registrants, which don't account for enthusiasm from certain groups, which don't account for various demographic groups showing up or not showing up historically. And that's what's happening with polls now. Polls are not picking up that Kamala Harris has an 18-point spread on white college grads, because that also talks about that's not just Democrats that are white college grads, it's Republicans that are white college grads. It doesn't take into account those people because that model did not exist in 2020. In 2020, the Democrats, Joe Biden, had a 9-point lead. She's doubled that. How do you account for that in polling if you don't put weight on that? They're not accounting for the Republican crossover, or the fact that she's whooping Donald Trump with independents, something Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton with in 2016. And it definitely is not counting the Roe voters that are out there who are ticked, peeved to the highest level of tickedosity and peevosity, and going to vote for Kamala Harris in record numbers in ways that we cannot take and understand via polling. Another reason why Kamala Harris is winning this race. The fourth reason is Democrats have been outperforming the polls since 2020. Folks, if you look at every major poll that's out there, even the reputable ones, they have consistently had one thing in common. They undercount and underweight Democratic enthusiasm and participation in these elections. It's one of the reasons why that most pundits and most media outlets missed calling the 2022 midterms what they ultimately proved to be, and that is underwhelming for the Their polling showed them, and these is even reputable polling companies, showed them that there was no way the Republicans were not going to have massive wins in 2022. Part of that polling error that all of them, and I do mean all of them, did not look at was the underperformance and accounting for an underperformance of Democratic turnout. Well, Democratic turnout set a lot of records for midterms in 2022, and the red wave never materialized. Likewise, in this year, most polls have been under accounting for Democratic enthusiasm at the polls and for turnout amongst Democrats. Pundits and pollsters have reasons for this, I assume. They're cautious because they felt like 2016 messed them up and got them into a place where they were unable to really do this the way they need to do it. And they have reason to be a little upset and a little cautious. But that is another reason why polls, another thing that polls are not picking up, another reason why Kamala Harris is winning. Now, why is Donald Trump losing? If you look at The Guardian, let's go to that article right now, as a matter of fact, so take a look at it so you can take my word for it. If you look at this particular article here, what does it say? Trump's ground game faces fraud claims. Donald Trump's ground game in Arizona and Nevada may be undercut by canvassers working for America PAC, that's Elon Musk's PAC, using GPS spoofing to pretend they have knocked on doors when they haven't, according to multiple people familiar with the practice and a leaked how-to fake location video, The Guardian reports. Quote, the ramifications for Trump may be far-reaching, given America PAC has taken on the bulk. Let me repeat. America PAC has taken on the bulk of the Trump campaign's ground game in the battleground states, and the election increasingly appears to be decided by turnout. A bootleg how-to-spoof video made by an American PAC canvasser in Nevada and obtained by The Guardian shows the apparent ease with which locations can be changed to fake door knocks, calling into question how many Trump voters, repeat, calling into question how many Trump voters have actually been reached by the field operation. Yes, folks, canvassers are using this campaign sidekick, which crashes without fast internet, and they're in rural areas, areas that are red, areas that are Republican and conservative. Those are areas in the South, in the Midwest, that Republican elected officials have never allocated money for to actually put in Wi-Fi, to actually put in the towers needed to maintain Wi-Fi. Shout out to Jim Clyburn for making sure that putting rural and southern communities in the infrastructure package and in the infrastructure bill to get Wi-Fi, that will not be a reality for long. Again, the rural communities owe their debt of gratitude to a Democrat in Congress and a Democrat president who signed the infrastructure bill into law, but I digress. And so this is leading to GPS spoofing the app, and this is Elon Musk, America PAC, which is doing it. That, along with Charlie Kirk and his mother-in-law, who sits on the board of the company that is actually producing this app, and most Republican state chairs are not using this app because it cannot track canvassers without real-time connectivity to geolocations and give you decent numbers. The second reason why Trump is losing is because, again, when we look at the ground, Elon Musk's PAC is doing most of Trump's ground game operation. This is not traditional. It is unprecedented, and it is leaving potential supporters of Donald Trump, the machine of GOP Republican parties in red states, in battleground states, without the tools they need to drag and pull their votes. And I know what some of you Trump supporters will say. You'll say Donald Trump can drag and pull with just his name, with just who he is. Everybody knows who he is. Everybody knows what their mission is. These rallies are just him going about the paces. But I would tell you, in a close race, a ground game, as I talked about when I talked about Harris having an advantage on the ground game, that's going to make the difference on election day. Not having a ground game loses you votes because you don't touch the low propensity voter, the voter who doesn't vote in every election. It has to be coddled and sought after and called and cajoled and reached out to and door knocked and email sent and snail mail sent and neighbors knocking on doors and robocall. All those things get low propensity voters to the polls, and they are the difference in a close race. When you have Elon Musk's PAC, which has never done this before, never had any kind of real campaign experience, you get what you get. The third reason why Donald Trump is losing is because of the first two, Donald Trump's campaign has admitted publicly that they still have not finalized their ground game. With 2 weeks left in the campaign, are you kidding me? What ground game are you going to put together with 2 weeks left that's going to net you the kind of vote you need to win these close states when Kamala Harris has hundreds of officers and thousands of volunteers who have been doing this for 3 months? It is the reason why Donald Trump, more importantly than what he's doing on the campaign trail, more importantly than what he's saying on the campaign trail or not saying on the campaign trail, this is the reason why Kamala Harris is winning, why Donald Trump is losing, and why he will lose in November. The fourth reason is he's reliant on groups turning out for him at rates they never had before. Now, you all know this. I've said this to you all a million times if you watch my content. Donald Trump had the ability to extend his tent, grow a greater coalition from the RNC speech. That's what you do at your national convention. You move to the middle, and you cast a wide net to get independents, to get Democrats, to get Republicans, to get Lottie-Dottie and everybody on board with your coalition to get to 50%. And Donald Trump had that opportunity and let it go. And since that RNC, he has not done that. He has doubled down on MAGA red meat rhetoric. He has continued to push conspiracy theories, continue to not talk issues with any clarity, with any specifics, with any agenda or plan for the next 4 years. He has doubled down on negativity and attack mode because he thinks it's 2016 and not 2024. He doesn't recognize that the very same fact that I tell people all the time in my content, that Donald Trump only wins in 2016 because against Hillary Clinton because he won independence. And the one fact we know about Donald Trump is that he has not won any election since then because he has not won independence. And in this year, 2024, he has not even made outreach to independents. Now, why is that important? Because he has doubled down on MAGA. He has tripled down on MAGA, quadrupled down on MAGA, hoping that his base of support will come out in record numbers and do for him what his campaign has not done in terms of reaching out to independents and what I call the 15% of Ronald Reagan mainstream conservative Republicans who have said they're not going to vote for him. Hell, they want him to leave the race. And so when the lack of reaching out to those groups has made him have to rely on record turnouts of MAGA, and that is not enough to win him the general election. And they're hoping and relying on rates of turnout from groups that they have never manifested before. Literally, Trump pollsters, Trump outreach, and this is being told to me by people who work on the campaign, are predicting, or I should say, need a 20 to 30% black vote turnout. Let me say that again. In order for Donald Trump to win on November 5th, Republican operatives and campaign people are telling me and saying it out loud that Donald Trump needs to get 20 to 30% of the black vote. I'm going to let that sink in for a minute. The best Donald Trump has ever done has been 10 to 17% of the black vote. Between 10 and 13% of the black vote. I know some of you are saying, no. Black men voted at 20% for Donald Trump in 2020. Yes, they did. But black women voted for Joe Biden in the 90%. So when you put those two together, the black community didn't give Donald Trump anywhere close to 20 to 30%. And without a ground game, without a plan, without any kind of outreach of significance to the same group, you cannot expect him to maximize and get more votes and a greater percentage in 2024 than he got in 2020. It's just not going to happen. He's losing support among non-college educated supporters. And I know what this pundit said when we looked at it. He said, well, Donald Trump is winning with non-college educated supporters. He is. And he probably always will. Republicans always will. But his support amongst non-college educated supporters is less today than it was in 2020. It's less today for the Republican Party than it was in 2022. Again, another reason why Donald Trump is losing. Polls in 2020 said that Trump would get about 20% of the black vote. He got 10 to 12%. And so when you look at these polls, some of them are weighting those populations at the same numbers that Donald Trump's campaign is anticipating is going to come out, which means it's faulty at its premise. It's faulty at its point. And it's another reason why Donald Trump is losing this race and losing this election. I hope I made that pretty clear. All right, so let's move on from there. Make sure I have your comments. Make sure I have your thoughts. And make sure I have what you think about this race. And bring some of your receipts about why you think Donald Trump is losing the race. Why do you think my things that I said are faulty? And why do you think that Donald Trump may be winning this race? Let's talk about it further. That's what we do here on Curious Formula Live. Again, subscribe, like, and comment below. Please make sure you go to my TikTok page, Curious_Formula. Subscribe, like, and comment there. So we're going to go on to education now. If you haven't been watching what's going on in public education, specifically what's happening in Chicago, and in terms of what's happening in public education, because you've been watching what's happening in this presidential race, I know that's what I've been covering for most of this time. You need to avail yourself as to what's happening in Chicago. And unless your head has been under the sand, I want to go to this one first so we can take a look at actually what is happening here. Take a look at this article about the Chicago mayor's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad debt plan for the district. What's happening in Chicago, folks, is emblematic, is an example of what is wrong with traditional district public education, PK through 12, and why your children, if they attend any of these schools, are not learning and have not been learning, not for 10 years, not for 20 years. God, I wish it was only 50 years, for 70 to 80 years as a group. I'm not talking about some black kids, some Latino kids, some Native American kids, some Asian kids are not learning. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the overwhelming majority, the masses of people of color's kids have not been learning in the traditional district public education system for 80 years with any source, any level of competency and ability to go to college en masse and as a majority, or be career ready en masse and as a majority. And you need to look no further than what is happening in Chicago to explain why that is happening. And while money alone is not the reason why people learn and get good educations. Take a look at this. This is a little bit about it. We're going to go through this. There are good debts and there are bad debts. Good debt is an investment in something that we will grow and value over time. For an individual, taking out a mortgage to buy a house might be a good type of debt. But it's risky to live beyond your means and take on debt if you don't have a way to pay back what you borrowed. And Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson is urging his city's school district to take on some very bad debt. Now, rather than balancing this year's budget through through program cuts or staff furloughs, Mayor Johnson is urging the district to take this out, a $284 million loan. And worse, the loan would only delay those decisions until next year when the city's budget shortfall is projected to grow again to, take a listen to this, $982 million. But Johnson is sticking with the idea, and the political fallout has come fast and furious. Chicago Public Schools CEO Pedro Martinez balked, leading Mayor Johnson to call for Martinez to resign. And when the superintendent refused, Johnson then escalated the battle to the school board. And not only did his hand-picked board members refuse to fire Martinez, they resigned en masse, sowing chaos just a month before the city's first ever school board election. Prior to this, folks, this is for your point of information, that the mayor of the city of New York, city of Chicago, used to appoint the entire board. It's still unclear whether Johnson will get his way, but the loan is a bad idea. As district officials noted in a memo leaked to the press, Chicago is already the largest junk bond issuer in the United States. Johnson's plan would make that worse. It's not exactly clear what terms Chicago will get on its proposed loan, but high-yield bonds rates as of October 14th were at 6.89%, and Johnson's team has proposed the district take on a 20-year loan. At current rates, that works out to total payments of around $540 million. That's before any fees, and it means Chicago will pay as much in interest over time as it would spend patching over this year's budget deficits. Now, let me say a couple of things before we go on further. You should know a little bit about who Mayor Johnson was. Mayor Johnson, before he became mayor, was an organizer for the Chicago Teachers Union. Nothing wrong with unions. I was a union member for most of my adult life, particularly when I worked for the state of New Jersey and I worked for the city of Newark. I was part of a union, a proud part of a union. Paid dues, even when I was in the executive level at the Department of Education in New Jersey and didn't have to be part of a union. I voluntarily had my dues taken out of my check to be part of a union. My dad, former state senator from New Jersey, was a big union supporter as well. And so I'm a big union supporter. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson worked for a union. And so it's interesting that this man will do all he needs to do to be supportive of unions, even as it renders his city and his school budget, renders them pretty much on the precipice of bankruptcy. And rather than making cuts, as the article puts out, and doing things like, I don't know, maybe doing joint purchasing with the city of Chicago to cut down costs, some ways of doing those kind of things, he wants them to take out a loan that actually, over the course of the loan, will not only be double, almost triple what the city would have to pay. He's also trying to make a bridge to next year when the budget shortfall for the city is going to be $982 billion, almost $1 billion. And he's using his power to basically press through the appointment of new school board members who will do his bidding and not listen to the superintendent of schools. Here's the other problem, though. All this spending, all these rates are trying to take the case, are trying to make up for poor decisions that the district made and that the city made in terms of paying its teachers, in terms of putting dollars that made sense into the system to pay for the things that the system needs, and in the face of declining enrollment. Yes, folks, the mayor of Chicago wants historic amounts of money to go into schools when enrollment is dropping, is literally hemorrhaging in cities like Chicago and other urban communities where parents are fed up with the 80-year dismal results of the education that their kids have to be subjected to, and are pulling their kids out and voting with their feet because the district won't provide the education opportunities their kids need. Parents with means and the ability and common sense are pulling their kids out. This is the system with declining enrollment and less kids that is now asking for more money and more resources with a less population that they have to serve. Now, let's continue. Moreover, a short-term loan would solve none of the district's real budget problems. There are 5 big ones: high salaries, put a pin in that, high salaries and ongoing contract negotiations, overinflated staffing, declining enrollment, rising pension costs, and the expiration of federal emergency COVID funding. Yes, folks, all these school districts got COVID funding as an emergency level. That money is drying up. It's drying up as we speak. And no, there's not going to be any more money coming from the federal government. So all the high salaries, all the staffing growth, all of the rising pension costs that came from all the new hiring and the new contracts, all that is coming to bear, and there's not going to be a federal bailout, folks. But let's get specific. Let's start with salaries, the article says. In 2019, listen to this, the Chicago's teachers union went out on an 11-day strike. And though its educators were already the highest paid in the country, the district agreed to what then Mayor Lori Lightfoot called a historic contract that raised teacher salaries, listen to this, 16% over 5 years, and immediately raised the pay of teaching assistants, clerks, and other workers by 40%. Amid the current budget fiasco, the union is now seeking 9% raises a year for the next 24 years. Now, the district won't be able to afford those without substantial new investments from the state. So now the district is asking the state, and let me just give you guys a little dirty secret here. The state in most of the 50 states that have large urban communities usually have to subsidize the school budget of those districts because school budgets are based on property taxes. And most of those cities have a lot of tax exempt property, and it was just left to those cities to pay for it out of their property taxes. They would not be able to afford the per pupil requirements it takes to actually educate kids in those states. And so most of those cities, I come from a city that depended on generous and large state investment. And so by taking on this, you're going to require a lot more state money. And how do you think the suburbs and other cities who know how to manage their budget are going to feel about their tax dollars going to Chicago when they're constantly paying people more money, refusing to make cuts, refusing to streamline, refusing to do joint purchasing with the county and with the city of Chicago proper to do what they need to do to save their money they need to. The next factor is staffing levels. The 2019 union contract promised every school would have certain types of employees, regardless of the school's size or enrollment. So yes, the union contract from 2019 actually said that certain schools would have to have certain employees, even if that school was losing enrollment. And this is proven particularly costly. The district says it has added 7,000 school-based staff members to 2019, more teachers, special education classroom assistants, nurses, counselors, and social workers. And at the same time, the district has suffered, listen to this, large declines in student enrollment. So you're adding all these teachers and classroom assistants and nurses when you have less students. Despite a small uptick last year, the city has lost, listen to this, 38,000 public school students over the last 5 years, a decline of 10.5%. And yet the political leaders of Chicago have stated they will not even consider closing under-enrolled schools until 2027. That is 3 years away from now, and that is political talk for kicking the can down the road. Okay, budgeting decisions like these would be anathema in any other industry where leaders normally try to match up the number of employees with customer demand. When business at a restaurant is slow, it needs fewer workers. If a hospital has fewer patients, it needs fewer doctors and nurses. Chicago's public schools is doing the opposite. Its latest budget boasts that it will, quote, complete its transition away from a budget model that primarily relied on enrollment, end of quote, to prevent schools from going into death spirals where fewer students leads to fewer staff, which leads to further disenrollment. That may be admirable or even smart in some situations, but it is also contributing to the current budget crisis. I couldn't have said it better. Bubbling in the background is what in 2023 the author dubbed America's worst teacher pension mess. Chicago has two major pension problems. One is that it has to pay for its own pension costs, unlike other districts in Illinois, which are covered by the state. The district now pays more than $1 billion a year towards its teacher pension plan, and that's still not enough to meaningfully cover its unfunded liabilities. But even more pressing is what to do about the pension costs for the district employees who are not teachers and who are covered by a separate municipal retirement plan. This issue has been a political football in Chicago for the last few years, with Lightfoot shifting the cost into the district and the district now trying to shift it back. These payments total $175 million this year. And on top of all this is the expiration of federal ESSER funds. Remember I told you those dollars that were given to districts to deal with COVID? That ends this year. The district prided itself on directing 92% of the $2.8 billion it initially received towards schools and staffing. But another way to say that is that Chicago chose to invest 92%, that's almost 100% of its one-time relief funds and full-time school employees. And now that the federal money is gone, Mayor Johnson is desperately trying to fill that gap. But taking on more loan debt won't solve his city's longer-term budget problems. For that, he'll need to come to terms with the pension challenges and address the staffing imbalance in Chicago schools. And I will tell you this, it will also have to deal with actually telling the teachers' unions and those special interests that are invested in status quo maintenance of relationships and quid pro quo and cronyism and corruption to maintain their cost of living. He's going to have to stand up and tell them no. Because to have the increase in budgets and costs and not have it be linked to enrollment as to who is actually attending schools, how are you losing enrollment and putting more dollars into the schools when you have less clients? That makes no sense. And what I will tell you is this, it's not, as a former municipal council person, it is not financially sustainable. Chicago is an example of what's happening to urban communities all across America. There are tons of communities, urban, Newark is one of them, across America that has aggressively given dollars to teachers unions, even as they are teaching the smaller and smaller classes. As enrollment is declining, their costs are rising. And eventually, the taxpayer is going to be the person that has to pay for it. And I could see if that payment and that investment was actually leading to results, right? You would think with all the money that has come into Chicago and cities like it, in terms of ESSER dollars to pay for tutoring and getting people back online after COVID, you would think that after an incredible budget that Laura Mayor Lightfoot gave to the teachers unions before COVID, and what this article does not talk about is that the teachers union right after COVID or during COVID said if you want us to come back, you have to renegotiate the contract that we negotiated a year ago because we want more stuff. And the mayor was like, wait, man, I just negotiated a contract with you. They wanted more on top of that. And she did that too. So they've had two upgrades, another upgrade coming with no look about how it affects the overall spending, pension requirements, and long-term deficit hit that these increases are going to lead to. But let's take all that as if you are a pro-progressive, pro-PK through 12 district school person, you say, well, Curious Formula, that's what we need to invest into our community to get the results we need for our kids, then that's what we got to do. I would agree with you. If all that investment in teachers and all this bureaucracy and all these services, even if enrollment was going down, was leading to kids actually learning, I would be all for that. But here's what all that money is doing for Chicago and the people that we should be looking at more importantly than teachers and special interest protectors and status quo vendors and contractors who are benefiting from all this largesse. Here's the result for who should be the first consideration, our babies, our children.
Good morning to you. Sadly, even describing it as a failing grade seems generous when last year only 1 out of every 4 Chicago public school students could read at grade level and only 17% were proficient in math.
Wait, 1 out of 4 students in Chicago public schools was a proficiency level for reading? Wait a minute, let me go back to that. Let me go back to this. I want to hear that data specifically.
Grade level, and only 17% were proficient in math.
Let me go back.
Could read at grade level. Only 1 out of every 4 Chicago public school students could read at grade level, and
only 1 out of 4 Chicago public school students was reading at grade level, and
only 17% were proficient in math.
And only 17% were proficient in math. I'm going to let that sink in. 1 out of 4 and only 17 could read at grade level in all of Chicago public schools. And only 17% were proficient in math.
The Chicago Teachers Union argues it's a funding problem and that more money would lead to better results. But since 2019, CPS's budget has grown by more than 57% to more than $9 billion.
Wait. The answer that the teachers union said to 1 in 4 kids being proficient in reading and 17% being proficient in math was that they needed more resources. Now, we just went over from the article from a week ago about the resources they've gotten, and you just heard on this report about the resources they've received since 2019. If you didn't hear it, let's go back.
And 57% to more than $9 billion, and there has been almost no significant change in those test scores.
So they've gotten an extra $9 billion. Now, we're talking about tens of thousands of students here. We're not talking about 1 million students. They can't educate those kind of students in this system. And their answer is, if we had more resources.
And a lot of families here are stuck without options to get their kids out of a failing school.
Students at an 8th grade proficiency, 21% of the students in Chicago can read at a 8th grade proficiency level, do math at that level. This is the plan. This is how it works. This is what happens in J.B. Pritzker's Progressive Illinois.
Now, Mayor Brandon Johnson and the teachers union want to spend billions more to invest in schools that arguably should be closed. One glaring example is Douglas Academy High School, which could hold more than 900 students, but last year had an enrollment of just 34.
Wait a minute. Should have 900 students and had 34 students, but because of status quo protectors of the district school system who said that enrollment should not play a role in any budgetary decisions, now has 38. The ratio to student to teacher in Chicago public schools on average is 19 kids to 1 teacher. At Douglas Academy, it is 5 to 1. There's 1 teacher for every 5 kids.
Meaning there was 1 teacher for every 5 students compared to the rest of the district that averages 1 teacher for every 19 students. And when it comes to funding, Douglas spent more than 3 times the district average with $68,000 per student. Despite all of that, last year, Douglas failed to produce a single student who could do either math or English at grade level. In fact,
now this is important. So because it's 1 to 5 student ratio, that means there was $68,000 per student to teach them how to read, write, and do math, compared to $18,000 per head for students in Chicago. Now, $18,000 per head, if you compare it to per pupil amounts of money in rural states, southern states, and Midwestern states, any kind of state that besides maybe California, New York, or some of the big industrial states, that's a lot of money per pupil. And in this one school, 68%, and no kids were proficient. And you're telling me it's about the money.
In fact, according to the Illinois Policy Institute, the last time Douglas had a single student proficient in math or reading was 7 years ago. Dana?
Garrett, how is that even possible? That last statistic that you showed, I thought your report's very important and one that we haven't heard enough about from either side on the campaign trail yet.
So, again, now, I just wanted to put for you how ridiculous these discussions are about money, how ridiculous it is about just resources, when the reality is that this is indicative, and this is not endemic to just Chicago. This is the argument. Maybe not at this level. I pick Chicago because they are in the fulcrum of fire right now because of the ridiculous movements and political motives of their Chicago-style union former member and organizer and advocate, who's now the mayor, and his perspective. But Chicago is not different than Newark. It's not different probably than any major city that you can talk about. If you look at Akron, Ohio, when people talked about LeBron James' school, and he bought laptops and scooters and refurbished the school building and is now building housing for the mothers, single mothers of these children that attend the school. And for 5 years, not only did the school board not receive academic and test results and reports from that school, so they knew how the kids were doing, when they finally got them, it showed that that Akron school was one of the worst performing schools in Akron and within the entire state of Ohio. And elected officials, status quo protectors, district school advocates, unions and the like, covered it up because they knew what those numbers were. And the point I'm only trying to make here is that we are fooling ourselves and our leaders are fooling us by not telling us what the problems actually are and feeding us this constant diet of if we just had more resources, if we just had more money. Listen, more money is necessary. I wish every good teacher, and I put a quotes around it, every good teacher who got results and knew what they were doing, some of the best ones that I had in school, like a Miss Hodges or Miss Bonner or a Miss Glenn, or Mr. Lavalette, actually produce results. They should get paid what doctors get paid. But if you're crappy and you don't know what you're doing, and you have a system that is making money off of our kids and it's per pupil head, and they're not learning anything to go to college or learning enough to be career ready and have a life outside of the underground economy, then people have to be held accountable. And I don't want to hear we need more money. Cities like Chicago have gotten more money. Indeed, public education funding, even where it's not as much as Chicago or some other urban areas, has increased exponentially over the last 20 years. And yet Johnny can't read. And sometimes I don't really care about Johnny. I care about Jamal. I care about Jamila. I care about Hector. I care about Maria. I care about Juan or Chung. I care about I care about Flying Earth. I care about Young Eagle Scout. I care about those kids because without an education, they are doomed from the beginning and have no opportunities. And they get lost in the system. Throughout that article I read to you, throughout this whole news story on this, you heard nothing about the kids. You heard nothing about what they need. You heard nothing about getting them what they need to get to the next level, to get out of poverty. All you heard was adult special interests. And so my only point with all this is, when you listen to these things, and all you hear is elected officials tell you, well, if you elect me, I'm going to give more resources to the system, look side-eye at them. Delve more into it. If you're an elected official listening to this content, do better. Investigate more. Find out why, with all the money that these schools are receiving, your kids are not learning. That's why I'm a school choice person. I'm a proponent. Not because I just believe in any school choice, but I believe parents like my parents have the right to find the best school option for their kid, the best public school option for their kid that they can find. And if it ain't in traditional school because it's dysfunctional in a district like Chicago, then my kids should not have to pay the price for a dysfunctional mayor or a dysfunctional school board or a dysfunctional school leadership or authority. Or I should not be forced to have to go to a school because it's in my zip code, it's in my neighborhood, and I have to go there because I'm just supposed to. No, not with my child's future. The reality is this, and I'll end it with this. If that were not true, if adults who know better, if adults who are educated and are hip to what's happening in the system did not believe like I believe, then they wouldn't be taking advantage of the system like they are. What do I mean by that? We're talking about Chicago. And what's interesting as we talk about the teachers union's role in all of this, the president of the Chicago Teachers Union sends her own child to a private school. And when questioned about it, she says because they had more soccer opportunities. Yes, folks, the people who are supposed to be advocating for your kids, providing the things that your kids need to succeed in life, are choosing and making choices for their families and their children and their futures and what their kids need because they have the choice and the options and the dollars and the money to be able to do it. So it's school choice for thee, but not for me. Just something to think about the next time somebody asks for your vote and they only answer to you about what they're going to do about education in your community is we're going to give them more money. Because we see firsthand that more money without a vision and more money in a bad system, and that's the same results that the masses of black and brown people have received from the public education system for the last 80 years. Undereducation, lack of opportunity, which leads to a perpetuation of generational poverty. But that's my time here today, folks. Thanks for rocking with your boy. Subscribe, like, and comment below. Make sure you hit the notification bell so you know when we go live. We go live every Wednesday night, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Be there, be square. Spread the word if you like the content that you're getting here. We'll work out our technical difficulties by next week, I promise you. But until that time, thanks for rocking with your boy. Peace. Stay curious. And remember, think. It ain't illegal yet. And I'm out.